I gambled 10 years of my life on a marriage only to be told that I was not even half the man her precious Jerry was. Even after I went missing for several days, her first reaction was not concern, but a cold interrogation about whether I still cared for her. She had the nerve to praise her little boy toy to my face and claimed he knew how to take care of her better than I ever did. She assumed I was still the same pathetic husband who would beg her to come home. But this time I was busy reprinting our divorce papers and catching a flight to sign a contract with a world-class animation studio. I finally woke up to the fact that I was never her partner. I was just her unpaid, on-call handyman. My wife had just come up with another pathetic excuse to sneak out in the middle of the night and meet her lover. That was the moment the last thread of my patience finally snapped. I sat on the edge of our bed and lit a cigarette with the divorce papers already waiting on the nightstand. I took one last look at the iMessage her lover had just sent to my phone. The text from Jerry thanked me for being such a broad-minded guy and letting Olivia spend so many nights at his place taking care of him. This was not the first time Olivia's boy toy had sent me such a provocative message. However, I did not feel the urge to explode in rage like I usually did. I was done calling Olivia at 3 a.m. to beg for an explanation she would never give. I sent back a calm reply telling him that if she cared that much, I would be happy to let them be together for good. I pulled the divorce papers from the folder and left them in plain sight on the nightstand. Olivia did not bother coming home that night. I spent the next morning tidying up the apartment before deciding to head out for a walk to clear my head. Just as I reached for the doorknob, the electronic lock clicked open. Olivia walked inside looking completely drained. She gave me the same cold and indifferent look she always did. She started to order her usual breakfast of oatmeal and 2 boiled eggs before stopping herself. She corrected her order and told me to make a double portion because she wanted to bring some of Jerry. She spoke to me as if I were a servant and stood there waiting for me to get to work in the kitchen. I simply stood my ground and did not move a muscle. She asked me why I was just standing there and complained that she was going to be late for work. I could hear that familiar tone of sharp reprimand starting to creep into her voice. I took a quick look at the divorce papers sitting on the nightstand. I told her that I didn't have the time and that I honestly didn't feel like cooking for her anymore. Her eyes widened in total shock as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She called out my full name, Lucas Miller, and asked if I was really trying to bail on my responsibilities. I nearly laughed in her face when she said that. Throughout our 10 years of marriage, I had handled every single chore in this house by myself. She had grown so used to my service that she viewed my labor as her birthright. The moment I refused to follow her orders for a single day, she lost her mind with impatience. She acted as if I had just committed treason by disobeying a direct order. She told me that if I was upset about her taking care of Jerry last night, I should stop being so jealous. She repeated the same old lie about seeing him as nothing more than a little brother. I looked her right in the eye and told her that I knew exactly what he was to her. I told her that I was simply tired and wanted to take a break. She snapped back that I had better be telling the truth before rushing through her morning routine and heading out the door. I didn't even get a chance to point out the divorce papers sitting right next to her bed. She vanished out the door without another word. I stood there looking around the hollow, silent apartment. Olivia and I were legally married, yet she had always been reluctant to even take a single wedding photo with me. Our only photo together was a shot she had begrudgingly agreed to take just to keep her parents quiet. She was standing as far away from me as possible in the frame with a painfully stiff smile on her face. I had spent years treasuring a photo that she treated like absolute garbage. I gave a self-deprecating laugh as I pulled that photo off the wall and tossed it into the trash. It was finally time to bring this 10-year-long joke of a marriage to an end. I used to believe that a decade would be enough time for Olivia to eventually develop some kind of feeling for me. I had hoped she might at least learn to consider my feelings. However, I was clearly just lying to myself. I had known about her affair for a long time. I had tried to maintain some dignity in our marriage by asking her to stay away from Jerry Henderson. Every time I brought it up, she would explode in a fit of rage and accuse me of being paranoid. She claimed that living with me was suffocating and that I never gave her any space. I finally decided that I didn't care about her freedom or her excuses anymore. I was more than ready to give her all the freedom she could ever want. She could go live out her little fairy tale with her boy toy for all I cared. I sat there in the silence of our home until my cigarette was finished, and I walked out the door with a clear head. I booked an international flight and prepared to leave the country. I had been sitting on this job offer from overseas for 3 months. My only reason for hesitating was the foolish fear that Olivia wouldn't be able to take care of herself if I left Chicago. Looking back on it now, my worries were absolutely pathetic. When my plane finally landed in Dublin, I was met at the airport by Sarah Parker. She was a few years behind me in college, although we had never actually met during our time on campus. This whole opportunity came about because I got lucky and took home first place at the Global Animation Showcase. A studio called Javelin Animation noticed my portfolio and reached out to me. Sarah was the recruiter who had been handling my case. Sarah gave me a bright smile and mentioned that she hadn't realized we went to the same university. She told me I was being way too humble about my success. Apparently, the news of my award was already the talk of the entire animation industry. She kept chatting as we walked and said no one would have guessed I was the genius behind that project. I had entered the competition under a pseudonym. Consequently, my true identity was still a mystery to the public. Sarah told me she would drop me off at the hotel before taking me over to the studio for a tour. She said their creative director was a huge fan of my work. She promised that if I signed with them, the compensation package would be world-class. I gave a brief nod while constantly checking my phone for notifications. Between the long flight to Dublin and going through customs, nearly 10 hours had passed. I hadn't received a single call or message from Olivia. I wondered if she had even noticed the divorce papers I left for her. I opened up Facebook and started scrolling through my feed until I hit a post from Jerry Henderson. He had posted that his stomach was bothering him again and thanked Olivia for ditching her job to come take care of him. The attached photo showed Olivia looking incredibly tender while holding a bowl of soup for him. They were leaning in close and smiling for the camera together. I hit the like button on his post without saying a word. My phone finally started ringing about 30 minutes later. It was Olivia. She sounded a little nervous as she told me not to get the wrong idea and said she was on her way home. I told her in a flat voice not to bother coming back at all. Olivia immediately dropped the act, and her voice turned ice cold. She started making excuses about Jerry being like family and having another stomach flare-up. She asked if I thought it was wrong for her to check on him given his difficult upbringing and lack of family support. She acted like she was the only person in the world who could help him. I scoffed to myself since her last name was Davenport and his was Henderson. I asked her how exactly he became her brother, and the question clearly hit a nerve. She immediately snapped and told me she was sick of my attitude. She demanded to know why I was always being so difficult. She argued that if she wanted to leave me, she would have done it years ago. Her voice got even louder as she told me she couldn't stand my sarcasm. She was really working herself up into a state of righteous indignation. She asked if I had forgotten who was responsible for the life we lived. She complained about working all day only to come home to my attitude. She pointed out that she had never even forced me to be the primary breadwinner. She told me that the least I could do was offer her some emotional support, but claimed I was a complete failure in that department. Every single argument ended with her playing the victim while acting like a hero. She always found a way to put me on trial for my supposed shortcomings. I remembered all the business I had secured for her when the company was just starting out. I had destroyed my own stomach by drinking with clients just to close her deals. I had spent countless nights working until dawn before dragging myself back to our apartment. When my health finally failed, she was the one who insisted I stay home and recover. Now she was acting like she had built the entire empire all by herself. She was rewriting our history to make me look like a burden. She didn't need to trash my reputation just to justify her relationship with her lover. I told her very calmly that she was right and that everything was my fault. I informed her that I was busy and needed to end the call. She asked what I could possibly be doing, but I just hung up on her. Sarah was standing right there and gave me a confused look. I told her it was nothing and that I was fine. A text from Olivia popped up on my screen a second later. She told me she was going to stay late at the office all week as a punishment for my behavior. She warned me not to even think about begging her to come home. I felt a slight jolt when I read the message. However, it wasn't out of fear. This was her standard operating procedure. Whenever we fought, she would use the silent treatment and stay away from home to punish me. In the past, I would always be the one to swallow my pride and beg her to return. She loved showing off to our friends and acting like I couldn't survive a single day without her. She fed her ego with my desperation. My dignity meant absolutely nothing to her. She felt entitled to trample over it whenever she felt like it. It was honestly sickening to think about how many times I had humiliated myself just to keep her happy. If someone doesn't love you, no amount of begging will ever change their mind. They won't even give you a shred of genuine affection. I ignored her text and focused on my tour of the studio with Sarah. I spent the next few days learning about the company and working out the final details of my employment. This was one of the best studios in the entire world. Therefore, I decided to take the leap. We agreed on the terms, and I signed the contract right there in the office. I told the team that I needed to head back to Chicago to take care of some personal business first. They were very understanding and agreed to let me go. Sarah was nice enough to drive me to the airport for my flight home. That was when I finally learned that her full name was Sarah Parker. It was a name that really suited her perfectly. She was just as sharp and impressive as her name suggested. Sarah told me she was looking forward to me starting and wished me a safe trip. I thanked her and waved goodbye before boarding the plane back to the States. I landed in Chicago around 5 o'clock in the morning. The jet lag was hitting me hard, and I felt like I was running on fumes. I forced myself to stay awake and caught a cab straight to the apartment. As soon as I walked in, I noticed a thin layer of dust covering everything. Olivia had clearly kept her promise to stay away from the apartment. To be honest, her absence didn't change much since she never did a single chore anyway. The place was just as messy as she had left it. I dropped my bags and looked over at the divorce papers on the nightstand. They were also covered in dust, which meant she hadn't even looked at them. She hadn't given the most important document in our marriage a second glance. I heard the sound of a key in the lock and went over to open the door. Two people were standing in the hallway, and the overwhelming stench of alcohol hit me instantly. Jerry Henderson was propping up a completely wasted Olivia. He had a smug look on his face the second he saw me. He told me to move out of the way and bragged about how they had been drinking together all night. I just gave him a slight nod and stepped aside to let them in. He led Olivia toward the bedroom with a level of confidence that suggested he had been there many times before. His movements were far too natural for someone who was supposedly just a friend. Once he got her onto the bed, my first instinct was to go to the kitchen and make her something for the hangover. I had to force myself to suppress that urge. That part of my life was officially over. It wasn't my responsibility to take care of her anymore. I decided to let her lover handle the consequences of their night out. Jerry tried to act concerned by asking where I had been, but I could hear the fake sympathy in his voice. He claimed that Olivia had come home late and called him because I wasn't there. He lied about trying to stop her from drinking too much. He even had the audacity to sigh as if he was the one suffering through this. Jerry told me I was being cold-blooded and claimed his heart was breaking seeing her in that state. I asked him if he really felt that bad for her. My voice was completely flat as I spoke to him. I told him the ingredients for hangover soup were in the kitchen and suggested he go make her a bowl himself. He looked surprised for a moment before nodding and heading toward the kitchen. I pulled a chair over and sat down with my eyes fixed on the divorce papers. A few minutes later, Jerry came rushing back into the room with a bowl of soup. Olivia spent the next hour throwing up and groaning in pain. In the past, I would have been frantic and doing everything in my power to help her feel better. I would have been running around the apartment to make her comfortable. Now, I just felt a strange sense of peace as I watched the scene unfold. Jerry spent the next 3 hours cleaning up after her and trying to get her to sleep. I could see that even Jerry was starting to lose his patience with her. I was so exhausted from my flight that I ended up passing out on the sofa. I have no idea how much time passed before I heard voices nearby. Jerry was whispering to Olivia about how he was the one who had taken care of her all night. He made sure to mention that he had cleaned up her mess and made her soup. He told her that I had just been sleeping on the sofa the entire time and claimed he didn't understand how I could be so heartless. I was suddenly jolted awake by a sharp kick to my leg. I opened my eyes to see Olivia standing over me with a deathly pale face. She had that look in her eyes that always preceded a massive explosion of anger. I had seen that exact expression 1,000 times before. I used to immediately start apologizing and begging for forgiveness whenever she looked at me like that. This time, I didn't even bother moving. I just looked her right in the eye and waited for her to speak. She demanded to know what was wrong with me and where I had been for the past few days. She accused me of disappearing on purpose just to upset her. She asked how I could go days without calling her and questioned if I even cared about her anymore. Her eyes were red, and she was doing her best to play the part of the wounded wife. She claimed she wouldn't have survived the week if Jerry hadn't been there to look after her. She told me I shouldn't even call myself her husband since I wasn't half the man Jerry was. She clearly thought her words would cut me deep. However, I only felt a sense of profound exhaustion. It was laughable that one night of Jerry's help was enough to erase 10 years of my unwavering devotion. It was a bitter realization that someone else's minimal effort could completely invalidate a decade of my life. That was the moment I truly stopped caring about our marriage. It was a cold and silent kind of despair that was far worse than any shouting match. I finally understood that no amount of effort matters to someone who doesn't love you. I asked her if she really believed that Jerry's one act of kindness was worth more than everything I had done for her over the last 10 years. I reminded her that it had been 10 years. I looked her in the eye and asked her if she truly didn't know whether I had cared for her. My voice remained steady as I spoke. I reminded her of the early days of her company when I was out there winning her clients. I had nearly destroyed my health by drinking for her deals until my stomach finally gave out. She was the one who told me to stop working and stay home to recover. She used to say she loved my cooking, so I made sure she had a hot meal every single day. I had delivered lunch to her office through rain and snow for her entire decade. I told her that even a stone would have softened after 10 years of such devotion. Instead of being moved by my love, she had only become more entitled and cold. I asked her to tell me honestly whether it was me who didn't care or if she was the one who had never truly loved me. A heavy silence settled over the room after I finished speaking. Olivia stood there completely stunned because she never expected me to stand up for myself. Jerry reached over and picked up the papers from the nightstand while pretending to be surprised. He read the title aloud and asked if I was actually planning to divorce Olivia. I was certain he had seen the papers earlier and was just waiting for the perfect moment to stir up drama. Olivia stared at the document in his hand and began to tremble as if she had just received a physical blow. She screamed my name and asked how I could possibly dare to divorce her. I took a deep breath and told her that I had been thinking about this for a long time. I calmly asked her to just sign the papers and be done with it. She stared at me for a long moment as the reality of the situation finally sank in. Before she could say anything, Jerry jumped into the conversation to make things worse. Jerry had the nerve to ask how I could break Olivia's heart when she supposedly loved me so much. I told him that was easily the most ridiculous thing I had heard all year. I looked at Jerry and told him that he was clearly there to fill my spot anyway. I had dealt with manipulative women before, but he was the first man I had ever met who could play the innocent friend so well. Jerry's face darkened for a split second before he went back to his fake gentle persona. He leaned toward Olivia and whispered that it looked like I was really serious about the divorce. He made sure to speak loud enough for me to hear when he said he would cherish a wife like her. He was doing his best to make me look like the villain of the story. He was pretending to be on my side, while actually portraying me as a cold and heartless husband. He completely ignored the fact that I had spent a decade of my life devoted to her. I had wasted 10 years of my life and had nothing to show for it. I never expected her to love me as much as I loved her. However, she couldn't even give me the basic respect I deserved as her husband. I realized there was no point in trying to save a marriage that was already dead. Olivia walked up to me with tears in her eyes and stared at me as if she couldn't believe I was actually leaving. She asked if I was seeing someone else, and I told her the truth. She started screaming and demanded to know why I was so determined to get a divorce if there wasn't another woman. I looked over at Jerry because she knew exactly why I was leaving. Jerry immediately put on a hurt expression and asked me why I was looking at him like that. He claimed he had never encouraged me to leave her. I took a slow breath and felt a weight of exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. It was a weariness that had taken root in my very soul. I realized that talking to her was a waste of time because she would never truly listen. I told her we would finish the conversation once she had calmed down and processed everything. I turned my back on them and walked toward the bedroom. She screamed at me that she would never agree to a divorce as long as she was alive. She sounded like she was the one who had been betrayed and broken. The room went silent the moment I closed the door, but the peace didn't last for long. I heard a loud and aggressive knocking on the door only seconds later. She demanded that I open the door so we could talk things through. I ignored her completely and let her scream. Her frustration grew until she started kicking the door in a fit of rage. Jerry started up his sympathetic act again and told her how much it pained him to see her hurting her hands. He told her that I clearly didn't care about her, but that he always would. Jerry's manipulation worked, and the shouting finally stopped. I sat in the silence for a while until I heard the front door click shut. I knew without looking that she had left with Jerry again. I truly didn't care anymore. My exhaustion finally won out, and I collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up the next morning and immediately reached for my phone. There was another message from Jerry waiting for me. He always sent me these types of texts whenever he was spending time with my wife. I opened the text and found a photo instead of his usual insults. It was a picture of two hands tightly interlaced. I knew immediately that one of those hands belonged to Olivia. She had never held my hand with that kind of intensity in our entire 10 years of marriage. I started laughing at the absolute absurdity of my life and the decade I had wasted on her. I closed the message and opened Facebook to see what else he had been up to. He had posted a status at 3 in the morning about how much it hurt him to see Olivia drunk. He had included a photo of her sleeping, which made me feel sick to my stomach. I got out of bed and made myself a quick breakfast before heading over to Kevin Thompson's office. Kevin and I had been close friends since our college days, and he had built quite a reputation as a lawyer. He greeted me with a big smile and said it was a surprise to see me at his office. He invited me into his office and had his secretary bring me a cup of coffee. I apologized for dropping in without an appointment and asked if he was too busy to talk. We spent a few minutes catching up on each other's lives before I finally got to the point. I told him that I was actually there because I needed his professional help with something. I explained the situation to Kevin and watched his expression change. He looked shocked and asked if I was absolutely sure about the divorce given how much I loved her. He urged me to take some time to think it over. I told him that it was time to let go and that there was nothing left to save. I managed to give him a weak smile. Kevin didn't try to talk me out of it. He just patted my shoulder and told me he respected my decision. I left the law firm and drove straight over to Olivia's office. She had always been the type to run away from problems and leave me to deal with the emotional fallout by myself. I was determined not to let her avoid the conversation this time. She was in a meeting when I arrived, so I just sat in her office and waited for her to finish. I looked around the room and remembered how I had designed every inch of the office for her. I had even handpicked every piece of furniture and every decoration on the shelves. Any outsider could see how much I cared about her based on the effort I put into her happiness. She was the only person who seemed to be completely blind to it. An hour later, I heard the click of high heels approaching before she walked into the room. She looked like she hadn't slept at all despite the makeup she was wearing to hide the exhaustion. She stopped in her tracks when she saw me before quickly putting on her usual mask of indifference. She made a sarcastic comment about me finally showing up. She clearly thought I was there to apologize and beg for her forgiveness. I placed the new divorce papers on her desk and got straight to the point. I told her to sign the papers once she had come to her senses. I informed her that I didn't want any of her money. I planned to sell the apartment my parents had bought for us and return the money to them. A heavy silence filled the office as she stared at the papers. Just as she was about to speak, the door opened behind me. Jerry Henderson walked into the room carrying a cup of coffee for Olivia. He froze in his tracks the moment he saw me sitting in front of her desk. I wasn't the least bit surprised to see him at her office. Olivia had been talking about hiring him for months. She had called me petty and small-minded when I tried to talk her out of it. She had told me that it was her company and she could do whatever she wanted with it. I knew then that there was no reasoning with her. Olivia suddenly grabbed the divorce papers and ripped them in half before throwing them into the trash. She screamed that she would never give me a divorce as long as she was breathing. I told her to stop lying to herself. I pointed out that she didn't love me and that the divorce should actually make her happy. I was finished with her dramatic performances. If she had ever actually cared about me, we wouldn't be standing in this office today. She bit her lip, and I could see tears starting to well up in her eyes. Jerry told her not to cry and set the coffee down on the desk. He grabbed some tissues and rushed over to her side to comfort her. He reached out to wipe her tears, but she pushed his hand away. She told him not to touch her and ordered him to leave the room immediately. Jerry looked completely shocked by her sudden change in attitude. I was just as surprised as Jerry was to see her act that way. It was the first time I had ever seen her be that cold to her little brother. Jerry pulled his hand back and put on his best pouting face while claiming he was only worried about her. He was a pro at playing the victim. She asked him what he was worried about and demanded to know if he had finished the work she assigned him. Her voice was freezing and completely different from how she usually spoke to him. Jerry's expression soured as he glanced at me. He whispered to Olivia and asked why she was still holding on to a man who wanted a divorce. Jerry kept talking and tried his best to drive a wedge between us. I ignored every single word he said because he wasn't worth my time anymore. Olivia looked at him with cold eyes and told him to mind his own business. She warned him that if he didn't stop talking, he could pack his bags and leave the company for good. The room went dead silent after she made that threat. I was genuinely surprised to hear her talk to him that way. I wondered if she had finally figured out who he really was. Jerry didn't have the guts to snap at her, so he directed his rage at me instead. He dropped the nice guy act and threatened me if I ever made Olivia cry again. I gave a small laugh and told him that my divorce would actually be doing him a favor. I suggested that he should be thanking me instead of threatening me. Jerry looked like he wanted to argue, but one look from Olivia silenced him. He turned around and walked out of the office with a frustrated look on his face. Once we were alone, Olivia walked over to me and used a surprisingly gentle voice. She admitted that she was wrong and asked if we could put the divorce on hold for a while. It had been 10 years, and this was the first time she had ever admitted to being wrong. I felt a small flicker of emotion in my chest, but I quickly pushed it back down. I told her that she wasn't the one who was wrong. I was the one who had spent too much time caring about her. She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away before she could touch me. She claimed she understood that I was upset about Jerry. She promised to never see him alone again and even offered to fire him on the spot if it would make me feel better. She sounded very serious, and I could tell she wasn't just saying it to quiet me down. However, no amount of sincerity could fix the decade of damage she had already done to me. Her apology had come far too late for me to care. I told her that her hands had already been held by someone else, and I didn't want them anywhere near mine. I admitted that I was a bit of a germaphobe when it came to shared affection. She immediately denied ever holding another man's hand. I just pulled out my phone and shoved the photo Jerry had sent me right in front of her face. The evidence was undeniable, but she still tried to lie her way out of it. She claimed that Jerry must have taken the photo without her knowing about it. I didn't care if the photo was taken secretly or not. I put my phone back in my pocket and stood up to leave. I told her that I was sure Jerry would take excellent care of her in my absence. I told her I would be waiting for her signature before turning and walking out of the room. She tried to follow me, but she was cut off by her secretary, who insisted she sign some urgent documents. Her path was blocked by her own career for once. I headed for the elevator, but decided to stop at the restroom first. I had only been in the stall for a minute when I heard a group of men walk inside. I recognized Jerry Henderson's voice immediately. He was complaining to someone else about why Olivia was refusing to give me a divorce. Another man replied that I was the one who had secured all the major deals for her company back when they first started. He seemed to have a lot of respect for my past work. I recognized the other voice as the new HR manager she had recently hired. Even though I didn't work there anymore, I still kept track of the major changes in her office. Jerry sounded incredibly confident and smug when he said the divorce was a sure thing. The HR manager seemed genuinely surprised that he was so certain about it. Jerry told the other man to keep it a secret before bragging that he and Olivia had already slept together. He claimed that she had told him she loved him more than she ever loved me. He said Olivia only viewed me as a free housekeeper who took care of the chores. I could hear the immense pride in his voice as he spoke. The HR manager laughed and called him a real player. They kept laughing as they walked out of the restroom. I had recorded every single word of their conversation on my phone. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely hold the device. I had suspected for a long time that they were having an affair. However, hearing him confirm it felt like a knife to the heart. I couldn't believe the woman I had loved for a decade was capable of such a betrayal. I lost track of time while sitting in that stall. I finally walked out of the restroom, feeling completely hollow and empty inside. Olivia was waiting for me by the elevators and tried to stop me from leaving. I felt a wave of pure nausea just looking at her face after what I had heard. She begged me to listen to her explanation, but I told her there was nothing left for us to talk about. I pushed past her and stepped into the elevator. She followed me into the car and grabbed my arm while whispering that we were at the office. She wanted me to give her some respect in front of her employees. It was laughable that she cared about her reputation after what she had done with Jerry. I looked her straight in the eyes and asked her if she had slept with Jerry Henderson. Her entire body went rigid and she immediately tried to deny it. She was predictable. She would never admit to anything without absolute proof. I hit play on the recording and watched as the blood drained from her face. She started babbling about being drunk and not knowing what she was doing. She claimed that Jerry was just talking nonsense and that it didn't mean anything. People usually tell the truth when they are drunk, but she acted like it was all a big mistake. I shook her hand off my arm and told her that she made me sick to my stomach. My voice was eerily calm. She asked how I could divorce her over one mistake when I supposedly loved her. She began to panic and started listing all of her own grievances as if that would justify her cheating. She argued that she had only worked so hard to give us a better life and asked why I couldn't be more understanding. She had the nerve to say that even if she did sleep with him, his victory was only physical because her heart still belonged to me. I was actually stunned by how shameless she was. I almost wanted to applaud her for having the audacity to say something like that. I told her that her heart was absolutely worthless to me now. I walked out of the elevator the second the doors opened and didn't give her a chance to follow me. I went back to the apartment and pulled several bottles of wine from the cabinet to drink by myself. I sat there thinking about how much of a failure my marriage had been. I hadn't been able to win her heart, and I hadn't even been able to keep her faithful. I have no idea how much I drank before I finally passed out on the sofa. I was eventually woken up by my phone ringing. Unfortunately, my head felt like it was about to explode from the hangover. I saw that Kevin Thompson was calling me. I answered the phone, and he told me in a very serious voice that my wife was currently trending on social media. I asked him what was going on since I was still half asleep. He told me to check the link he had just sent me before hanging up. I opened the message and clicked on the URL he provided. The headline was incredibly sensational and described the affair between a local CEO and her employee. I clicked on the article and found a large block of text accompanied by a viral video. The video was a recording of the confrontation I had with Olivia in the elevator earlier that morning. It was clear that someone had recorded us and posted it online with malicious intent. I scrolled through the comments and saw that most people were attacking Olivia for her behavior. The video was spreading like wildfire, and her comment about only giving Jerry her body had already become a meme. People were sharing the clip everywhere and mocking her logic. One commenter suggested that her words belonged in a museum for the worst excuses ever given by a cheating spouse. I found the whole thing to be both ironic and pathetic. I sent a text to Kevin asking if the video could be used as evidence in our divorce proceedings. He responded immediately and told me that the video was excellent evidence. He said there was a high probability she would walk away from the marriage with nothing. Since she refused to sign the papers, I decided to take her to court. Olivia came home a few hours later looking absolutely defeated. She clearly couldn't handle the heat of the scandal at the office. She kicked off her shoes and walked toward me with an exhausted expression. She saw the phone in my hand and knew exactly what I was looking at. She asked if I'd seen the news, and I gave her a short and cold confirmation. She asked how I could just sit there and not comfort her while the entire internet was attacking her. She looked like a shell of her former self and had lost all of her usual arrogance. I told her that she had brought this entire situation on herself. I reminded her that I was the actual victim in this scenario regardless of what people were saying online. I didn't feel sorry for her at all. She tried to reach out and hug me, but I stood up and backed away from her. I walked straight into the bedroom and locked the door to keep her away. She stood outside the door and wouldn't stop knocking and apologizing. The sound of her voice was giving me a headache. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning and assumed she had already left for work, so I started packing my bags. I was surprised to find her sitting at the dining table when I walked out of the room. She had prepared a full breakfast consisting of all my favorite foods. She greeted me with a smile and encouraged me to sit down and eat. She made sure to mention that she had cooked everything herself. I couldn't believe she was actually in the kitchen cooking for me after everything that had happened. I would be lying if I said it didn't affect me at all. She was, after all, the woman I had loved for most of my adult life. Everything might have been different if she had shown this kind of effort years ago. I told her that I wasn't interested and that I had to finish packing. My face remained completely neutral. She looked confused and asked what I was packing for. I decided there was no longer any reason to keep my plans a secret. I told her everything about the job offer I had accepted in Dublin. Olivia froze for a second before jumping up from her chair and rushing toward me. She sounded panicked as she asked when this had happened and why I hadn't told her sooner. I told her that I planned to tell her, but she had been too busy spending time with Jerry. I added that it didn't really matter anymore since we were getting a divorce anyway. I felt a wave of relief at the thought of finally leaving Chicago and starting a new life. Olivia kept insisting that she would never agree to a divorce, but I just ignored her. I went back to packing my things as if she wasn't even in the room. She spent the next week trying to play the part of a perfect wife by coming home early and cooking for me every night. It was a complete reversal of her usual behavior. Her efforts were overshadowed by the fact that her company was falling apart. The scandal had destroyed her professional reputation, and her business partners were all pulling out of their deals. The studio was on the verge of bankruptcy, and she was completely desperate. She came home that night and begged me to help her save the business one last time. She reminded me that I was the one who had built most of those relationships in the first place. I looked at her and calmly suggested that she ask Jerry Henderson for help since she valued him so much. She hesitated for a second before trying to change the subject. She pleaded with me to help her because we were still legally married. I told her that enough was enough. I had already spent a decade doing everything in my power to support her and her business. I had fulfilled every single one of my responsibilities as her partner. Her constant presence at the apartment was becoming unbearable, so I had to find a temporary place to stay. Luckily, I was already packed and ready to go. I planned to head straight to the airport as soon as the divorce was finalized. I stopped answering her calls and eventually just blocked her number entirely. Since she couldn't reach me, she apparently convinced Jerry to start messaging me instead. He sent me a long string of insults and claimed that I wasn't a real man. He vowed to stay by Olivia's side no matter what happened to her company. I found his sudden display of loyalty to be hilarious. I was almost positive that he was the one who had leaked the elevator video in the first place. I sent him a message wishing them a long and happy life together. I blocked his number immediately after sending it. My life was finally peaceful again. A few days before our court date, I received news that Olivia's company had officially filed for bankruptcy. I didn't feel any joy at her downfall. Instead, I felt a strange sense of sadness. It was difficult to see the company we had built together completely fall apart. Jerry Henderson was right there by Olivia's side when we arrived at the courthouse. He looked smug, as if he had already won some kind of victory. I looked at them and felt absolutely nothing. The judge eventually ruled in my favor, and Olivia was ordered to leave the marriage with nothing. She had officially lost everything she had worked for. I walked out of the courthouse without looking back and caught a ride straight to the airport. I was ready to leave that part of my life behind me. I had spent the last few days tying up all my loose ends in Chicago. The apartment was sold and my parents were taken care of. There was absolutely nothing left for me in this city. Someone tapped on my car window and I was surprised to see Olivia standing there. I rolled down the window and looked at her with a questioning expression. She looked at me with a serious expression and asked if she could go to Dublin with me. Her voice reminded me, for a second, of the young girl who had once promised to marry me. Times had changed, and she was no longer the innocent woman I had once loved. I reminded her that we were officially divorced and suggested that she start focusing on her own future. I glanced at Jerry and told her that some secrets can still be uncovered even after a company goes bankrupt. I wanted her to know that I knew exactly what they had done. I told the driver to head to the airport and left them standing there. Olivia was smart enough to understand exactly what I was implying with my parting words. The moment I stepped onto that plane, I knew that I was finally done with my past for good. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as we took off. I arrived in Dublin and found that Sarah Parker had already taken care of all my living arrangements. I settled into my new job quickly and started producing some of my best work yet. Olivia called me a few weeks later to tell me she had discovered that Jerry was the one who leaked the video. She seemed to think this information would change something between us. She informed me that she had cut Jerry out of her life for good. She then had the nerve to ask if she could come to Dublin to visit me. I told her that I was already seeing someone else and asked her to never contact me again. Sarah wasn't technically my girlfriend yet, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before we made it official. After a decade of self-sacrifice for an ungrateful wife, Lucas realizes that being useful is not the same as being loved. This story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength isn't our ability to endure disrespect, but our courage to walk away when our value is ignored. Lucas's journey from a free labor husband to a globally recognized talent proves that when you stop centering your life around someone who devalues you, you finally find the space to flourish.